start registering for that now. So mark your calendar for November 8th. And then our final event of the year is going to be a special one. We're going to do a 40th anniversary celebration for PTCMW. And we're going to do this at Bar Louie near the Verizon Center. Hopefully a lot of people were able to come. We had a special event there in August. APA convention was in town and we did a joint happy hour with SIOP at Bar Louie. And it was a great event. It was a great location. So we reserved the space with them. It's going to be on Wednesday, December 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. So we'll have drinks and food and some special recognition of the last 40 years of PTCMW. So mark your calendar for that as well. So a lot of these events are already up on the website. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. So now I am going to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Martha Lappin is going to talk about using multi-source ratings in promotion decisions. Dr. Lappin holds a doctorate in industrial organizational psychology from Michigan State. She spent the first 15 years of her career as a research psychologist for the U.S. Army Research Institute for the Behavioral and Social Sciences, where she supervised a research team, and she managed a research program to enhance the assessment and development of Special Forces soldiers. She was honored with a Superior Civilian...
Read that part. That was for another title.
Okay, well, I'm already started. Let's recognize you. A Superior Civilian Performance Award from the U.S. Army Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel for her work. In 1997, Dr. Lappin left the government for the consulting world, where she directed a large clinical research trial, and she conducted statistical analyses in large and complex survey and personnel databases. She chaired an international psychology graduate program and designed and led leader development programs in public and private sector organizations. She also spent 2 years directing a large-scale, high-visibility assessment of sexual harassment and sexual assault in Army training centers and operational units across the globe. The results were briefed at the highest levels of the Army and incorporated into the Army's Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Program. Dr. Lappin returned to the federal government in April 2016 when she was hired by USAID to lead the Foreign Service Performance Management Redesign Initiative, and she's going to talk about some of that work today. So join me in welcoming Dr. Martha Lappin.
Thank you. I'm going to have to switch glasses now. I can choose to either see people or paper. I guess I'll go with people. I tried the graduated bifocals or trifocals, then I can't see anything with them, so I just gave that. Yeah, we just got a new directive at USAID that anything for the admitted administrator has to be 14% font. Right, will that work? Okay, great. So what Diane didn't say is we have been immensely helped by Diane and Meredith Farrow and her team over there at PDRI in pulling together this massive redesign of our performance management and promotion system at USAID. And so what I'm talking about is what we have proposed, and it's 95% approved by our union, and part of the reason I was happy to do this talk, although I almost backed out, poor Diane, I'm sorry, but we're getting busy, is that we have union members who are a little bit nervous about using any kind of ratings for promotion decisions. And I understand a lot of people have reservations about that. So I'll go through some of the thinking that we've gone through about that. And I really, I didn't plan a big long talk because I really would like to get some input from folks, especially those of you who are probably more familiar with the research than I am. I've gone from being a researcher for most of my career to now being in HR and trying to design and implement programs and answer emails, and every now and then on the Metro I sneak in a couple journal articles, but that's about it. So. Okay, turn it on first, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Is that work?
Okay, let me.
Okay, sorry.
All right. Let's see.
Okay, so if you read the abstract, you know that here's what I started with is a quote. There are a number of folks who might be saying a similar thing, but appraising managerial potential is best accomplished by using the collective judgment of multiple assessors rather than a single individual. And this sounds really logical, right? Not many people would argue that multiple perspectives are better than a single source. Yet when we try to implement a program that uses multiple perspectives or multiple source ratings or information, people get really nervous. Like, oh no, you can't do that. You know, we should only be using 360 feedback for development. And so it got me thinking about, you know, where's this coming from, this resistance? And in my mind, it comes largely from our ambiguity around the term 360 feedback, what it means, and our failure to articulate the purpose of what we're doing and align the purpose and the methods. And so I'm going to talk you through some of the thinking that we went through when we were trying to respond to the argument that I've heard and read, oh, you can only use 360s for employee development. So first, I'd say, is this a useful question? Should 360 feedback be used for decision making, or should it only be used for employee development? The answer we hear, it should only be used for employee development, is a response to this implied question. I'd argue that this is really no more useful than a question like this. Should knives be used for carving turkeys, or should they only be used for paring apples? So how do you respond to that question? Like our famous, it depends, right? What would be your response to that question?
It would be the shape, the length, and the characteristics of the knife as to which is the most useful operation.
Exactly. And if all you know is, if the only knife you have is a carving knife, right? And that's when somebody says knives, you think carving knife. And you go, well, that's crazy. You shouldn't use a carving knife to pare apples. Or if all you have is a paring knife, you shouldn't use that to carve turkeys. And I think that's how people respond when they think about 360 feedback. That they're responding to a question, they have a concept of what 360 feedback is, how it was designed in their organization, what they've read about it or know about, and they answer the question based on the assumption that you're going to use this process for something else, and it's likely to be flawed if you do that. So better questions, starting with, I mean, this is preaching to the choir, right, but what are we trying to accomplish? And then is there a way, is it possible, that information collected from multiple sources, i.e., if you want to call it 360 feedback, you can, might help us accomplish what we're trying to do? And then, do the benefits outweigh the costs? So when we started with that question in our performance management and promotion system redesign, what are we trying to accomplish? We had two very different answers, right? So one thing we're trying to accomplish at USAID is we're trying to get a better system and a process for developing employees. And that really hinges on, for behavioral change, increasing self-awareness, inspiring people to change, supporting self-improvement efforts, enhancing skills, and ultimately changing behavior. When you contrast that with the other goal, promoting the right people, which involves at USAID, it's an internal promotion process, it's an up-or-out system, and we have promotion boards that review files and make determinations about who should be promoted or not. So it involves giving the decision makers, basically our board members, the information they need to assess the relevant skills and rank order candidates. And so if you look at those two goals, like no one in their right mind would say, oh, let's design a perfect system for developing employees, and then, oh, by the way, we'll use it to promote people too. I mean, they're too different, right? So if we move beyond, you know, I consider it kind of, it's frustrating sometimes because it feels like we're arguing against a straw man. I actually had to look that up. So what is it, a straw man? And it's when in debating, one side will put up kind of a fake argument. They will exaggerate or misconstrue deliberately misrepresent someone's argument just so they can knock it down. It's a weak argument. So it kind of seems like that's what happens sometimes. People will take a flawed system that no one would really argue should be used for administrative or personnel or pay decisions, and then argue why you shouldn't use it. It's like, but we weren't going to use a really bad system, we're honest. We were going to design a good one. So anyway, Total and Conger, back in 2003, kind of tackled this by saying, okay, let's articulate why an organization should refrain from using a 360 process designed for employee development for performance appraisals or administrative decisions, just in case it isn't obvious to people. Or kind of like, why you shouldn't use the carving knife to bear the apple. So they had a really nice organizational framework. They talked about things that matter at 3 different levels. And so from the individual level, it really matters who owns the data when you're collecting, whether it's, again, 360 feedback or multi-source ratings. When you're collecting performance assessments from multiple sources, it really matters if the employee owns that data or the organization owns it. And so, for example, in some of the leader development programs I was doing, we were very careful to, in the leader development program, make sure that the manager or executive we were working with in that program, they owned the data. They requested 360 feedback. They decided who to request it from. The report went to them. It was confidential. It was totally up to them who they shared it with. And that was a very effective way of handling some kind of difficult data. And they had coaches, and so it was a very employee-centric 360 feedback process. The stated purpose, when you send out your surveys or your assessment interest, makes a big difference in terms of how effective a 360 process will be versus a multi-source rating for administrative decisions. At the interpersonal level, again, who selects raters? One of the objections I hear a lot when we talk about using multi-source input for promotion decisions is, well, yeah, people will only select their friends. And I say, but see, we're not going to allow them to do that, all right? We will put in place a logical framework, guidelines for selecting raters. And so if I'm in a leader development program and I'm really interested in what are my blind spots, where do I need to grow, I'll deliberately pick people who might be able to tell me about those blind spots. Or if I'm in a really bad state this year and I just need a lot of praise, I'll pick my best friends. But I have control over who I select, and the accuracy or relevance of the data will be reflected in, my purpose in selecting people. But if you're designing a system where you're going to use ratings for administrative or promotion decisions, you don't want people to just pick their best friends, or you don't want a supervisor to just pick people who will agree with their assessment. And so, I can talk about it later in discussion if you want to hear more, but so we worked with PDRI and we designed guidelines for selecting raters. There's a large pool of potential raters, and the employee and supervisor go through the list of potential raters and see if they meet these 4 criteria. If they meet the criteria, they're in. If they don't, they're not. And none of the criteria have anything to do with, do you really like them? It's, how long you've worked together. It's the nature, intensity of your working relationship and or the frequency of it. Are they in a position to understand some of the complexities of your job? And also, are they in a position where we can require them to take the multi-source rater training so that they're good raters? So we had to exclude some, like customers or beneficiaries, because we can't work with them on making sure that they're accountable for their ratings. The collusion, that's, that's the other concern about using I'm going to say MSRs, multi-source ratings now. For decision making is that individuals might be tempted to collude with each other and say, I'll rate you high, you rate me high, da-da-da. And again, that is an issue. We have an advantage at USAID in that the people who are competing for promotion come from all over the world. And so you're at one of 70 missions, you're there for 2 years, maybe 4 years, maybe 1 year. You're only going to have an opportunity, if you were that kind of person, to collude with maybe one or two other people who are in your promotion pool of 200 people. And so there's, of course there'll always be people who try to game the system, but in designing a system you've got to think about that. What are the costs and benefits, and can you identify people through algorithms and your statistical analyses who have, patterns of ratings that look like they're gaming the system and all that. But anyway, that's one of the tough issues to deal with, but we're thinking about it. And then some of the others, frequency and timeless assessments. Of course, if you want developmental feedback, you want it to be more timely and more related to, your natural growth spurts, learning opportunities, training opportunities. And the organizational level, I thought this was an interesting one, the accuracy versus honesty, and I didn't know what they meant by that first. Does anyone have any insight or intuition about that? I'll explain what I understood in a minute. When we're asking people, when there's a difference between accuracy and honesty in ratings. So what Tola and Congo were talking about is that if for example, I have a blind spot or an annoying habit that may be holding me back, it might be something that would derail a manager, it's very important that I get honest feedback about that. But that feedback about that bad habit or that poor skill isn't necessarily an accurate reflection of my overall performance. And so in developmental feedback, we might want to focus on give me an honest assessment on one character flaw, one fatal flaw, or something that might derail me, whether or not it's representative overall, or whether or not, my performance on this dimension is at all correlated with my performance on the other dimension. Whereas if we're looking at making decisions based on some kind of overall composite assessment, then it's very important that we get accurate assessments. If we combine data, we want to combine it in a way that the composite score, how we're making our decision, is a more accurate reflection of performance. Does that make sense? Kind of interesting distinction there. And then other issues that matter are, are you going to highlight differences across sources or minimize them? Of course, if you're into the psychometrics of it and you're in the old kind of validity generalization school, or we want to get everything down to one single accurate, the true measure of performance. All these differences across raters and sources are really annoying. We want to average them all out. But in the typical 360 feedback, people find it very, very interesting to see the differences in how they're perceived by people at different levels, and that can give them some real insight into how they're perceived in the work environment. And then qualitative versus quantitative, how job-related things are, and then the key in the decision-making model is the psychometric properties. So anyway, I didn't mean to go on that long, but I thought they had a good those are things that matter. So when I was doing a briefing for our unions, and they were concerned about, even though we insisted all the time, we were talking about multi-source rating, not 360 feedback, and I'll step back for a minute. We have, at USAID, we have always had, many years, a requirement that supervisors collect 360 feedback on their employees for the end-of-year evaluation. Their annual evaluation is a big, long narrative form, and supervisors are required to get input from at least 3 other people. But the input they get is qualitative. It's generally reduced to, for many, not all, some use that process very well, but for most supervisors, they are just looking for a quote to put in the AEF, the annual evaluation form, to show that they did in fact reach out to other people, and so they'll find a quote that supports their overall assessment. And they call that 360 feedback. And so it's a really tough hurdle to get over to let people know that, no, that's not what we're proposing to use for decision making, that phone call that a supervisor makes to get a quote. So what we're proposing at the same time that we're proposing using multi-source ratings for promotion is that we really strengthen the 360 feedback process for development. And so on the left side, I'm talking about not exactly what they do, but trying to highlight for USA decision makers in the union that we want to move beyond what you do now for 360 feedback and actually use it for development and design it for development. So, as I said before, like the goals are very different. One is about, changing behavior and helping people become more effective. One is about accurately predicting future success. Now we're into the I world. We want statistically valid and reliable predictors of future performance. The underlying assumption, though, is the same, and this is where the confusion comes in. The underlying assumption is that observations and perceptions of a supervisor are not sufficient to capture all relevant aspects of performance in all contexts. Multiple perspectives minimize bias and limitations of a single person perspective. So that is the same. The key question that you need to address in designing a good 360 system versus a multi-source rating decision, the way I framed it is that for development, the key is how to obtain and share performance feedback in a way that enhances self-awareness, minimizes resistance, motivates individuals to develop new skills, reinforces important organizational values. And when you go back to the literature on feedback and how people, and some of the neuro leadership stuff, and how, we're just wired to resist negative feedback. We're just wired for defensiveness. And so it almost, what you collect the data on and how, job related it is and how, psychometrically sound your analyses are and how good it matters so much less than how the feedback is delivered. And so that, to me, is really the key, and that's what we're focusing on in our performance management system, is training supervisors to be able to deliver feedback, encourage discussions, have those quarterly conversations, get people self-reflecting and inspired to change. And that, I think, is the key in development, versus in the multi-source ratings, it's really, we want to minimize bias, we want to do something that would separate candidates, differentiate the top candidates from the rest of the pool, and encourage fair and consistent scoring processes. So I won't go through the rest of these, but all the other things, if you notice, we've got one area where we have something the same. Nothing else is the same. And that's what I'm trying to emphasize when we're talking to in-house decision makers, is that there's nothing else that's the same about 360 feedback for development and multi-source ratings for promotion. The initial analysis, determining what to measure, the sources of the data collection methods, who owns the data, it's all different. The nature and the content of the data, the requirements for confidentiality, and the key in presenting the data, all different. And so again, we're designing a system where we hopefully are getting the best of both worlds. So the next step, if we get people convinced that it's a very different process that we're proposing to use in promotion decisions from 360 feedback, then we want to jump into the how can we go about designing a method to collect reliable and valid predictors of future performance? And so then we go back to our roots, my roots in Michigan State. I was just talking to Ted. I was there when Jack Hunter was teaching there, and Schmidt was collaborating, and there's a lot of talk, a lot of courses about validity generalization and the G factor in performance predicting, and of course we know from many studies that cognitive ability is the single best predictor of job performance, especially for more complex jobs, and that there's some other traits that also explain variance, conscientiousness being one, and a couple others, maybe social skills. But we also know that given adverse impact and the face validity and social acceptance range restriction, we can't be using those. In government jobs, when we talk about promotion, we're not going to be using cognitive ability tests to select for promotions. But we can look at what other kind of predictors are useful. And so we know that assessment center ratings are valid in use of predictors of future success. So whether some assessment centers have well-trained, independent assessors, some use other managers, some use a collection of peer ratings, but other people's assessments, the point is other people's assessments other than supervisors can give ratings that are good predictors of future performance. When we look at a different body of literature on the peer and subordinate ratings, that's where we get a lot of the studies on the multi-trade, multi-method analyses and looking at raters as methods and all that. We still have a lot of data showing that peer and subordinate ratings are valid predictors of future performance. Way back in this is where I needed my glasses, so I can't remember all these. But Kane and Lawler in '78, they did a meta-analysis of a whole bunch of studies back then. I think they had 13 studies, and had a mean validity for peer and subordinate ratings of 0.49, predicting future performance, which is mainly measures of either advancement criteria, how many promotions or salary increases, or supervisory ratings. And then there was a really cool study, I thought, by Atkins and Wood in 2002 that actually validated peer and subordinate ratings against assessment center ratings. So the assessment center composite score was the criterion. And they found that although supervisor ratings were the strongest single predictor, that you substantially increased explained variance in this completely independent set of ratings from the assessment center when you added in peer and subordinate ratings. So kind of what we took out of that is that, back to the very first point I made, the quote, that assessing managerial potential, that's what we're talking about at USAID. These are all people who come in with pretty responsible jobs. They're managing big programs, so we're talking the kind of work that Foreign Service officers do is management of people and programs. So appraising is best accomplished by using collective judgment of multiple assessors rather than a single individual. So we can take that away from that body of literature. And I know there are other really good studies. Anyone want to volunteer one that I should have cited that really makes the point? If it contradicts my point, you can keep silent. I'm kidding. No, really, I need to know about those two. And then we look at what we know about error ratings, and this is really kind of interesting literature where all the studies that are looking at the multi-trait, multi-method analysis and partitioning variance, they all conclude that idiosyncratic rater effects account for a lot of variance, more variance than anything else, generally about 50% or more of the variance in multi-source ratings is this sort of not associated with source, well, that's another issue, not associated with dimensions or common variance around the assessment of performance. Where the big controversy has been in the literature is the validity generalization type people. Any article that has Frank Schmidt in it, they will partition variance that is due to sources. They basically call it idiosyncratic rater effect. And then there are other analyses, confirmatory analyses, things that are way beyond me, way beyond anything I learned in graduate school, that are saying, no, there are ways to do second order factors and all that and sort all that out. And that's right, Lance, you know about all that stuff, right? That they've been overestimated. They've been including source effects due to your position in the organization, whether you're peer, subordinate, or supervisor, into that, others are calling error. But anyway, there's still a lot of unexplained variance that seems to be due to idiosyncrasies of the raters. And then you might also consider that the very low within source correlations, that's kind of interesting that even in studies where you've got two supervisors, very low correlations across two supervisors, which again calls into question the wisdom of relying on a single supervisor. When there are two supervisors knowledgeable about the job and the individual, they don't agree much more than two peers or two subordinates, or much more than supervisors agree with peers. So some would call that error, because people from the same organizational level aren't very consistent in their assessments. And we also know after like 20, 40 years of trying to train raters to not make halo errors, not make leniency errors, not do, like, you're just like me, so I like you errors, whatever that one's called. Feminist error, whatever. The what?
Similar to your.
Yeah, that one. That, it doesn't help all that much. You know, people still kind of rate the way they're going to rate. So, you know, the bottom line for me is that you just have to use a lot of people. You just have to look for, you know, the law of large numbers and just try to get enough, you know, 4, 5, 8 people and average it all out. Assume that it's kind of random variability there. And, you know, if you get enough people, the average will give you a good picture of the true performance. So then this leaves me with 3 questions that I hope we can discuss. In fact, I'll talk fast. What time is it?
5:05.
Okay. So, when should I stop so that we have time for, like, you know, food and drinks and stuff?
5:30.
Okay. I'll stop before then. So this is really interesting because the big presumption in 360 feedback for development is that you get really valuable and important information from different sources. That's why we do 360 feedback, because subordinates have, you know, a different perspective. And then Wally Borman, back in 1997, articulated, you know, 2 reasons why the different perspectives could have valid information instead of just being wrong because they don't agree. One was the opportunity to observe hypothesis or explanation that people, you know, subordinates and peers are observing different behavior when you interact with them. They're working with you on projects in different ways than you work with your supervisor. So they truly do, they see you do different things in different ways and demonstrate different skills. The other explanation that can also be true is that people in different contexts, even when they're viewing the same behavior or the same skill, they have different goals, and people rate others and value what you're doing or saying or displaying differently depending on their interaction goal and the context. So that leads them to rate things differently. And there's a good example of in ours that a supervisor, for example, might consider the target person to be very responsive and efficient and reliable, because they will drop everything and run to a meeting as soon as their supervisor asks for help. Well, from a subordinate's perspective, that person is unreliable and not responsive and kind of disrespectful because they're always canceling meetings with you to run off and meet with a supervisor. So the exact same behavior is viewed differently based on their perspective and their goal. So we've got the limit. So the agreement across sources is low, which is, like I said, is problematic to people who look at that as error, who are trying to find common variance, common shared perceptions of someone's performance. But if you're looking at it as we really have 3 different perspectives on behavior, all of which can be valuable, and all of which, from our purposes, could be very important in predicting future success. So, for example, if I'm a supervisor of 3 people, and when I'm promoted, I'll probably be a manager of 20 people, it seems that it would be really important to see what those 3 people I manage think of how I supervise and manage them before we decide to put me in charge of 20 people. So that perspective can really add a lot. So the questions really, I don't have any answers to how we're going to deal with this, because what we're proposing is that we will collect confidential ratings from peers and subordinates. The ratings from supervisors will not be confidential. But actually the culture is kind of interesting at USA that there's such a culture of inflating accomplishments, being nice on paper at least, and writing up AFs. All the narrative assessments are just filled with hyperbole, with exaggerated, responsible for increasing the literacy of a country, me alone, and just this, crazy inflated narratives about performance and skills that, I forget what I was going to say. Anyway, it's like that. How should we deal with different? What would I have said? What would be a logical follow-up?
Is that self ratings or self statements about themselves or other people?
Oh, okay. Good question. It's actually what they tell their supervisor to say about them, because right now at USA, the end of year annual evaluation form is the one and only document that goes to the promotion board. So instead of really having an honest, candid conversation about performance at the end of the year, developmental needs, or it's all about, okay, it's AF time, how can you make me look like a superstar? Because I'm up for promotion. And so that's just, a big part of the culture, the exaggerating, and it's a real cultural shift to get people to think about. Over here, we have performance management, performance evaluation, discussions about performance and priorities and what you should be doing, what you do well. And then later, over here, now you're competing for promotion. And it's fine now to put your best foot forward. And, it's fine to, try to highlight your strengths and ask your supervisor to maybe help you highlight strengths. That's fine. You're competing for a promotion. But over here, we should be talking about, honestly, how can we get prepared in case you get that promotion? How can you be prepared to be more successful? So I guess that maybe where I was going is, so how we deal with differences across sources when employees need to get scored and ranked. So, that's what it was, the supervisors. So we actually had foreign service officers saying that maybe the supervisor ratings of their employees should be confidential. And that kind of blew my mind. Isn't that the supervisor's job to tell you how you're doing and rate you honestly? And they go, oh, but nobody will, because, it's just it would be so out of the norm and the culture for anyone to give anyone anything other than 5. So the only way we'll get supervisors to be honest in ratings for promotion is to allow supervisors to have their ratings be confidential. I'm like, okay, now what's that going to do for trust? And, your supervisor's going to rate you for promotion but not tell you? Anyway, so we dropped that. It's no, supervisors, step up, take the heat, be honest. And the cool thing about having confidential subordinate and peer ratings is that at some point, we hope, supervisors will get embarrassed into being a little bit more honest, because they're going to look kind of silly if they're rating everyone all 4s and 5s because their ratings are public, and other people are coming in, the 8 peers, their average is a 2.8, and the supervisor's average is a 4.7, and the boards will see that, and HCTHR will see that. We haven't figured out what to do about it yet, but hopefully they'll realize that they're going to look like they're really out to lunch if they're the only ones rating, a mediocre or poor performance. They're a belligerent employee. That's what we hear. People will get mad at you and there'll be conflict and stuff.
But isn't it normal, I guess you could say, that a contemporary will have a totally different view than a supervisor or a subordinate in 360.
Mm-hmm.
And that when I used to give feedback, it was I was talking to 3 people sitting across the table from me, because each of those ratings were very distinct between the 3 levels of raters.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to train the raters better.
Yeah. Well, we definitely need rater training, and you had a good point. I think where it's going to come up is we'll be doing our ratings. They're items that are linked to the 4 core skills and sub-skills. And I think where this is really going to help the promotion system is the people who have really poor interpersonal skills. There's actually a problem, sadly enough, with bullying at USAID. There are people who keep getting promoted, and they treat people terribly. They treat Foreign Service nationals. A lot of the workforce, or well over half of the workforce at USAID, is local people at the missions. So we hire anywhere from support staff to the economists and the doctors. So we have a lot of Foreign Service officers who are supervising local Foreign Service nationals, we call them. And it's not a lot, but they're enough that, it's like when I was doing sexual harassment and assault in the Army, it doesn't take a lot of, sergeants and officers sexually assaulting people to really mess up the climate of a unit. It just takes a few, and we have a few. And so what we're hoping by having the confidential ratings from peers and subordinates is that the supervisors who are not confronting the people who are abusing other people, it's going to be exposed there. So I think on those dimensions, that's where it's possible that the supervisor might not see the behavior and might be, honestly oblivious, which is also a reason we need to have the other perspectives. But just back to your point, the value of having all three perspectives is that the supervisor clearly won't be able to assess whether or not somebody is accomplishing their work objectives, meeting the requirements, supporting the mission at a certain level. But because these are all professionals and often are working independently from a supervisor, they're managing large projects, managing multi-million-dollar budgets and large staffs and all kinds of politically sensitive things. They're doing a lot of very important stuff with their peers. And so often, what we heard in talking to people and from this current state assessment is that, often the people you're working with and serving are really in a much better position than your boss who's up here maybe managing at a very high level some of the politics up and down the chain of command, but really the best assessment of your skills and abilities might be from your peers. So anyway, so we don't know how do we deal with differences? That's kind of like, shall we average them all? Shall we present them? When we go to the board, they need to ultimately make a decision that you're number one, you're number two, you're number three. That's what the boards do. They identify across a pool of people, like maybe 200 people. They identify the 20 or 30 they think are good candidates for promotion, and then they rank order them. And then they promote from the top down till they fill the number of promotion slots they have available. And so they need a way to say, you're best, you're next, you're next, you're next. So if you have, and I should back up, the promotion decision, this is only one component of it. So we've never argued, never would argue that this number, the score, determines your promotion. A big part of the promotion package is the employee's promotion input form, where they write how they've best demonstrated each of the 4 core skills, and they give examples that can go back to their previous promotion. So they write out kind of the situation, what they did, the outcome, the result, and highlight the skill that they demonstrated and how they demonstrated it. The supervisor writes a short narrative about, highlighting their skills or what they think the board needs to know. The supervisor will also do a rating. Then there's also an annual accomplishment objective for every year since their last promotion, actually for the last 5 years. The top 5 accomplishments, or how they contributed to the mission. And then there's a mission context, like what the issues were that the mission faced, and issues, wars, famine, Ebola, whatever it was, that affected that individual's particular job. So there's a place for the board to read, they were working in a position where half the staff was evacuated, they had to take over a program they'd never managed before, and then they get to write up, what they accomplished. And then there's also the training record, the awards record, so, all kind of their assignment history. So there are lots of sources of information about the individual. One of the sources of information is the multi-source ratings. And what's most important about those is it allows the interpersonal skills to be rated, because you can't get that from results and accomplishments. So it kind of rounds out the whole person picture. But we still don't know, we haven't figured out, how we should weight these, and that's one of the things the union is rightly concerned about. And so whenever they get nervous about, well, what if, a peer or subordinate, somebody wants to tank you and they're vindictive, or they, for some reason they don't like you and they could, affect your promotions. Like, yeah, but you know what? There's supervisors like that too. You can't eliminate, you can't legislate out or get rid of every single person who might potentially want to abuse the system or be unfair. We're going to try to at least not promote them, maybe eventually get rid of them. So, we just kind of come back and say, well, there might be one peer who's like that. There might be a subordinate like that. We're requiring at least 3 subordinate raters, and we're asking for like up to 15 peer raters if they all meet the criteria. So hopefully, it's a very small percentage of people who are going to be vindictive or try to game the system, and their data will get kind of averaged out or minimized. Their impact will be minimized. And there's still the possibility that it's the supervisor who's vindictive or unfair or biased. And so it's, so it's like kind of whatever you propose using, there's an argument for and against it, and we just have to look for some kind of balance. But that's a struggle. We're going to be doing a mock promotion board in the fall and try to get input from the promotion board about what's helpful.
One relevant consideration occurs whether it should be a compensatory system or kind of a multiple cutoff. If you're saying that each of these perspectives is valid, if you average them out, then that may wash away some of the meaningful differences. So should they have to reach certain standards among peers, among subordinates, among supervisors, or could those sources compensate for each other? That seems to be something.
That's a really good point, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, any other ideas? This is a tough one.
But you're giving all of this stuff to the board, and the board's forming a composite any way you want to.
Not quite. So in the past, each board that was convened, they had the AEFs, the narrative evaluation, and then that board by themselves would sit down and figure out, okay, how are we going to sort out all these people? And it was totally unstructured, totally different year to year, from board to board. Last year, Alana Kober, who hired me, tried to bring in some standardization by saying at least, here are some scoring sheets other people have used. Here's some ways other boards have done this. But our policy was that each board is completely independent in terms of how they do it. So it was a really terrible system because you had strong personalities sometimes, and the chair of the board would just say, here's what we're doing, and assignment complexity is really, really important. So that's what we were gonna, they had decision criteria they were supposed to assess against. But anyway, so what we're doing, and the big challenge that we're going to be addressing in October with the mock boards, is we're going to be pilot testing guidelines and systems, like an evaluation framework for the boards. There's still a lot of subjectivity in how they combine this, but we're going to give them, so we're not going to a straight, like, here's the mathematical formula, but we're moving really far further towards that than, hey, just kind of, get a gut feel and go for it. And in fact, we had to disband our first mock board because the people who were recommended for it, they're experienced board members, and poor Meredith was there trying to get them to articulate what made this candidate good. It's like, you know what, I just know it when I see it. It's kind of a gut feel. You've been doing this so long. You just read an AEF and you put them in a good pile. And it's amazing. People agreed with me most of the time, and I got it. And, we're trying to try to do an expert judgment, analysis. And as we said, we'll call you later. We might have to postpone this and do it in the fall and try to get people who might be a little bit more analytical in terms of, what. And we would like to do that if they do have a very experienced person who's been on the board and out in the field. It's kind of like some of the expert decision-making stuff. they may have a very good intuition about what makes a good candidate, and we need to have them articulate that and help us understand how they are intuitively weighting the different sources of information, the different ratings. And we might get to something like, the compensatory system. Somebody might say, if they're below a 2 on this dimension, there's no way, but on another dimension, well, you can compensate for that. That's not a problem at all. So
on this promotion board, are these positions different? In other words, do you have a plumber, an electrician, and a manager, and a
No, we have, good question. We have all the skilled trades. So, so they have 3 boards. We have what are called backstops for some reason. It's very strange because the abbreviation is BS. You keep having to write about this, if you're in BS number 12, then but anyway, so they have 13 backstops and they're clustered by similarities. So we've got some that are more program support, and some are program development, and some are more clearly technical, like the accounting, finance and legal. And so they're not, the positions themselves, this technical specialty areas may not be very similar, but it's kind of like the role they play in the organization. I think that's how they cluster them. So that, for example, if you're trying to assess the relative contribution to the mission, and before there's a lot of emphasis on results, impact, and so you have the poor contracts officer trying to compete, with the one who got the vaccine out in the field and vaccinated all the moms and babies, and trying to compare them on impact for promotion. The poor support backstops really felt undervalued. And so they've tried to put those support backstops together so they're competing with each other. And we also changed the language on all of our promotion materials to highlight it's not how you have saved the world, it's how your position, your work has contributed to the team's ability to accomplish the mission. And so, but anyway, that's an aside. But so they are grouped. And then one of my dreams is just the LIV research. I look at the data we're going to have. We're going to actually do, in the spring, we're going to do a complete administration of the multi-source rating process and not use it. So I learned a lot from Alan Church, who moved to having subordinates assess managers in PepsiCo. And they rolled it out over several years, and it's become a very successful program. Hopefully still is. Last article I read was very successful. And one of the things he strongly recommended was that you communicate a lot, but also that you give people a chance to get really familiar with the process and the ratings before you use it for real. So we won't be using this until June of 2019. But this coming spring, we're going to have everybody, whether they're eligible for promotion or not, go through the process with their supervisors of selecting ratings and getting the ratings. And that round of ratings, the results, will be completely confidential. Except for me, I'll get to analyze the data too. So they'll have a chance to see how they're rated by peers, subordinates, and their supervisor. And, sit with it, and hopefully our supervisory training on coaching and feedback will have kicked in, and supervisors will know how to talk to and work with people who are really discouraged by the data they get back, or, can help kind of coach them through, dealing with, whatever they get. But so we're going to have this incredible data set of really good items, sound items, job-related, based on the skills, not used for anything, put in the vault. We'll have all that data, and then we've got what will become a very, I think, robust and sound board process for assessing potential, and boards will get better at it. So in 5 years, we'll be able to validate these assessments that were never used for selection against a criterion of the board's ranking and rating based on all kinds of, 5 years worth of data. So if anyone knows a doctoral student who needs dissertation data, well, 5 years down the road, or maybe 3. But wouldn't that be a cool study? Read all these, all the limitations of all the studies I'm reading. It's like, they can't do that. We can, I hope. So anyway, sidetrack, but so I'll just skip over this pretty quickly. The dimensions, it's kind of crazy. We love dimensions. Psychologists, I remember in my master's thesis, my dissertation, just so convinced that these items measure something different than those items. They're so clearly different. And then you correlate them, and they're all correlated, 0.8, 0.9. It's like, I'm sure I had different dimensions. So we have 4 core skills, and I think that's probably the maximum you might ever find any distinctions on. And I don't know, we may just have one big G factor. We probably will, or not G, one big performance dimension. But most of the studies, no matter how many dimensions you assess, you're going to come down to about 2 or 3, kind of the task, the people stuff, and maybe some supervision leadership stuff. So, I don't really know how we should handle that in developing the feedback reports for our boards. My gut feel is that we want to keep the dimensions separate because they're based on the skills framework, and the skills framework was developed after a lot of work and discussions about what are the skills and sub-skills required for success on the job. And conceptually, they are different. Empirically, not so much, but I think it allows, it's easier for people to think about ratings on, these 4 dimensions than it is if we just say, they're so highly correlated, here's your number. Anyone have any experience with that? Using, dimension scores when they're so highly correlated that you could probably get a better composite measure if you just average them, but then it's not as, doesn't feel as rich or as, and obviously when you're talking about, and this is kind of interesting, when you're talking about for development, clearly you want your dimensions because that's how people know what to change. When you're talking about, when we were doing leader development workshops, it's like, you can't change everything. You can't change a dimension, but there's one behavior you can change. Pick one thing, and if you have really good items, the best 360 instrument I ever used had excellently worded items and really clearly differentiated 3 levels of performance. So you could look at those items and go, oh my God, I do this thing exactly, and I need to be doing this thing. Now I can work with that. I can't really change my, my overall, leadership style, but I can do that. But for a board that needs to come up with a composite rating at the end, I don't know. So, and this was just kind of interesting that, I kind of did my summary here, but that when, was it, Arthur Day, McNally, and Evans, they did the meta-analysis where they looked at the validity of the dimensions in an assessment center, because generally assessment center, they average everything, right? They come up with one overall score, and he was saying maybe we're losing some predictive power, even though the dimensions are pretty highly correlated. And so they had a bunch of dimensions, and it was kind of interesting that the highest dimension, highest validities for the individual dimensions were problem solving, influencing others, organizing, and planning, kind of like your management or, taxonomies of leadership management skills. And the problem solving was the single most important predictor. And what's that a surrogate for? What's that? That's cognitive ability, right? So we're kind of getting at cognitive ability anyway, when you're using assessment-centered dimensions. So anyway, my conclusion was that, we use our dimensions, our 4 core skills. We'll differentiate as much as possible so they're meaningful with behavioral descriptors and examples. So we may get more discrimination across dimensions because we do have, I think, really good definitions of our skills and core skills and our items. We'll see. And we are asking our boards to kind of do like the assessment, like in assessment centers when they when they assign ratings to dimensions across exercises instead of trying to assign an exercise score. So we're kind of asking our boards to do that, is assess this dimension, this like dimension of leadership or results, impact focused, professionalism, talent management. Assess the dimension after reading the promotion input form, looking at the accomplishment record, and looking at the multi-source ratings. So that's the direction we're heading in now, that they will be assessing dimensions because of the core skills. Those are the decision criteria for promotion. But they'll be doing it kind of like in an assessment center type style. You have multiple scenarios across which you generalize. And then maybe we'll eventually get to use some statistical methods. So if we do get that ultimate criterion later down the road, we might be able to determine that, maybe we should, in this situation, this setting with really smart, really dedicated professionals who work intensely with peers, maybe the peer ratings are the better predictors. Maybe we should give them more weight than anything else, or subordinates, we don't know. So that's all I have. I have a few slides about what we're actually doing for the performance management redesign and promotion redesign that I can show you if you're interested, but I'd rather hear from you guys. Thoughts, questions, advice?
One idea that I had that you may want to consider, and it goes back to the experts, I'm so expert and I can't really explain to you what I'm doing, is to maybe try and use algorithms to policy capture exactly how they're arriving at their decision-making process. So maybe use some of the historical decisions that have been made by previous boards. It would probably have to be separate by backstop, but maybe a couple of years back of different decisions made. And basically look at how people ended up performing. So 2 groups, who did well as a manager, who didn't do well as a manager, come up with policies for those 2 groups separately, and then do a comparison of those different algorithms to see if there might be some clues about what they were actually using to make their decisions and how they were weighting them.
That's a great idea. If we had more than just the AEFs, it might work a little bit better. The problem with the current data is that boards have made promotion decisions based on reading 5 years worth of these long, densely packed, kind of coded AEFs where it's just this big, long narrative that touches on all kinds of stuff, 5 years worth, and 4 people all somehow discussing all of this and then coming up with a ranking. And I've read some of those. It's like small print, it's like PDFs, they're blurry. And after reading about 20 of those, it's like, oh my God, how do they differentiate anything? And that's what the data, when we do the current state assessment, no one thinks that the AFs do a good job differentiating people. So it would be really interesting if you could find something in this massive narrative data that people were zeroing in on.
For themes first before you commit to that second phase.
Do you have a graduate student project? Well, thank you. I'll think about that. We could also do it later. Actually, that might be good for pilot tests, except we don't have the criterion. Other thoughts?
I just wanted to push back a little bit on your exclusion of the cognitive ability tests.
Okay.
On your slides, you had, it has range restriction. All of your measures have range restriction.
Yeah.
You're dealing with incumbents. And all of your measures also have a lot of the vagaries of human judgment, friendship ratings, and all of that mess. And the cognitive ability test wouldn't have that. So I would, if you could, it would be nice if you could, stick in a 12-minute Wonderlic in your,
Yeah.
something, it doesn't take much.
Yeah, I know.
Stick that in your little pilot test. And then you can.
That would be really cool.
Dimensions you're using are cognitively loaded.
For example.
And maybe want to emphasize, to get rid of the jerks in your management,
Yeah.
emphasize something non-G-ish.
Yeah. I like that idea. We used to wonder like a lot in special forces, and yeah, even there, maybe especially there, it was really useful predictor. Yeah, I would love to develop a relationship with a university or a research organization that we didn't have to pay a lot of money to do some of these studies, because we could at least get a subsample maybe that would be willing to, like a few missions or a backstop, that we could get to do something like that for research purposes and then follow up.
Because, you're going to get a lot of things just loading in G.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you have ratings of people's performance. It's the best picture performance.
Right.
You're just measuring G a lot more convoluted.
Yeah, right.
The test.
Yeah.
It's not going to pick up, the jerks and the.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, it's funny. Everyone wanted to, when we were exploring different ways of, doing performance assessments, and the, it was the Deloitte measure of, would you want to work with this person again? And so we actually developed a bunch of response options for that people loved, and our community stakeholders. All this was developed in conjunction with the community stakeholders. So we've had a lot of input from Foreign Service officers, and so we had some, what we thought were really cool response options about, would you want to work with this person again? It's like I would, and on one end was I would turn down an otherwise desirable assignment to avoid working with this person again. And on the other end is that I would accept assignment in an undesirable location just for the opportunity to work with this person again. And everybody loved that item. It was like, that's how you find out where the jerks are. And we finally had to, it was like, you know what, we're doing a new process, we keep harping on job relatedness, and it's like, we're just going to have to trust that the jerk dimension will come out in the interpersonal skills rating. And we've got other items that will capture it, but they were so disappointed when we said, we're not a psychologist, we just can't defend using, would you want to work with them again in this new promotion system where we're trying to, really defend something very new and very sensitive, and, there are just too many reasons you might not want to work with someone again that aren't job related. So, but yeah, it is a great way to catch jerks.
Could you relate those negative aspects to the work culture?
Yeah, yeah. One,
define motivation to some
mm-hmm.
extent. Selling versus minimum values.
Say it again. Selling, say it
In
again.
other words, if it's a really supportive culture and the supervisor is a leader, that's going to get people pushing beyond minimum minimum performance into the excel and whatever the definition of is.
Yeah. That reminds me of something that's another problem is that employees at USAID, they bid on assignments. And so they talk about the hallway reputation. And there are people who bid on assignments and no mission director will take them. So they wind up back in Washington in this kind of limbo status for a while until there's a shortage somewhere and somebody really needs their skill and they're like the only one available. Or they bid on a hard-to-fill post. And then some of the hard-to-fill posts, some are hard to fill because they're just horrendous, they're Iraq or Afghanistan and they're just difficult families and all that. But there are other hard-to-fill posts in, not nice parts of the world. And they wind up being like little kind of incubators for poor performers because they start with people won't get picked up anywhere else, and then you get kind of a critical mass of people who are poor managers, poor supervisors, and poor employees. And then there's another reputation, then it's not only hard to fill because it's difficult assignment or location, but everybody knows you don't want to go to Liberia. That's even when they swap out or they, try to put in one or two different people, there's enough entrenched, poor performance, attitudes, low motivation, that, and so that's another issue is, what do we do to people who, could be good performers. Maybe they had one tough year, one bad year, somebody doesn't want them, somebody doesn't need their skills, so they're hard to place, so they wind up having to go there. And then they spend 2 years or 4 years in this kind of toxic environment of poor performance and, what kind of impact that has on people.
When I was at the Postal Service, we had a corporate succession planning system, and we used G and cognitive ability. And this is to get to the executive level. So we were administering people cognitive ability and SJT and personality. And so we didn't really rely much on multi-source, a whole lot. And if you think about like using a situational judgment test, although it certainly would be correlated with G, I know for Foreign Service officers for the State Department, we're developing an SJT that has some face validity so that the situations look FSO-ish, but they really other stuff that's more generic to the job, to dimensions, wherever they may be. And so it's something you might think about using different kinds of measures like a face valid SJT that looks FSO-ish, but measures some more generic things than just not. And we can't use knowledge of the job because it's actually
It seems like that would be a difficult thing to administer with so many people competing for promotion every year. Is it just for senior level?
Well, for the ones for FSOs, for the State Department's entry level.
Oh, okay.
Through Pearson.
Interesting. We do need to do something better for our untenured people. The first 5 years, once you're tenured, it's very difficult to get rid of. That's part of the problem with like the bad apples is that in the Foreign Service, once you're tenured after 5 years, it's really difficult to get fired. And so we really need, that's our next project, is to tackle on both ends, to tackle the junior officers, untenured still, and get a lot more discriminating about who we tenure. And then on the other end, there are senior Foreign Service officers who manage to get up through the system, and they have a huge impact. There are a few bad ones, and they have a huge impact on, when they become mission directors or deputy mission directors. And so there are people who are, right now, the proposal that we were working on is for the FS 04 to 01s, like kind of the mid-level people. We haven't messed too much with the senior Foreign Service other than their skills framework, but the junior officers really, really want to institute multi-source ratings for the senior Foreign Service, thinking that that's the only way to at least maybe keep them from getting promoted even more, that there are just some who really need to be assessed by peers and subordinates.
Would it be possible for peers to provide ratings when they're competing with the individual for the same promotion, or is that accounted for in your criteria for eligibility?
That's a very good question. We are wrestling with that one. I think Meredith and you maybe were suggesting that they should maybe be eliminated from the pool of potential raters. If you're an 03 and you're competing that year, you're eligible competing to be an 03. I'm not sure. I think we may get some data to support going one way or the other when we do the ratings that won't be used. I don't know if people, hopefully they'll do the ratings as though it's like for real and they're competing. My thought is that in small missions, you may be eliminating most of your peers if you don't allow peers who are in the same promotion pool to rate each other. So my possible solution is to educate, when we do the multi-source rating training, is to educate people, remind them that if they are trying to increase their chances of being promoted by low-ranking other people, that it's going to have virtually no impact. Because I think the mindset is, if you're, in civil service, you're in a company where there's, 5 people competing for that next level promotion, yeah, if you're rating, one of the people, you're one of the 5, and you rate somebody low, it will substantially increase your chances. It'll bump you up. It'll push them down and bump you up. But, I think if we can show through examples that when you're competing with 200 people, and you low rank the 2 people from your mission who are in your pool, that in that pool of 200 people, it's not going to change your rating. It's going to push somebody down, but if you push 2 people down a couple of points in the pool of 200, it's not going to bump you up from non-promotable to promotable. It's just, and there's a risk. That's why I kind of said the cost benefit of colluding. So we need to talk about that up front when we do our training and say, we know that some people will be tempted to collude on I rate you high, you rate me high, or, bump themselves up by low rating other people. We just talk about, we know that'll happen, we know it's a temptation, and we also have the data and can look for aberrant patterns of ratings. I did surveys for the Army for a long time, and so I know a lot about looking for pattern responding. and you can create algorithms where you can identify people who have a pattern of if they're an 03, when they're rating other 03s, they give them all 1s, and the other people are the normal pattern, and the people they give 01s, no one else is giving them 01s, and so it'll take a little detective work, again, dissertation students, but, we can create some algorithms that, and tell them that we are creating algorithms that will give us a sense of who might need additional training and how to, do accurate, honest ratings with integrity. And so, again, it would be a big step to go out and say, we know you're gaming the system, we're going to punish you. But, I think a little threat of being detected could go a long way. So I don't know, so it's a good question. We don't know, we'll see. It'll be really interesting to get the data. I think so many people, and the other argument that we can make is the way people move around, like they move every 2 years, sometimes 4 years, that if your ratings aren't really designed to get the very best qualified people promoted, you're punishing yourself because you're going to work for people who are getting promoted. At some point you're going to be working with or for them. And so again, it's kind of appealing to help the system work to get your next boss, to get promoted the right people. So I think with a little bit of threat, a little bit of scare that, they'll know who you are if you're trying to cheat, and, let's just, even if you don't like somebody, if they're a really, really good manager, really good with other people, don't try to ruin their chance of getting promoted. You think it'll work? Yes, no? What do you think? Would you eliminate people from the pool of potential raters if they're competing that same year for promotion? See, it's a hard question, isn't it?
You could also do a trim to mean where you get rid of the bottom
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, we are going to give distributions to the board. We haven't quite figured out how to help them deal with that. The first couple of years, we'll be taking a really good hard look at the data, but we we'll give them not just means, but a distribution. So again, it's going to be a little tricky if we try to come up with some kind of mathematical way of using scores, but we're going to have to make an adjustment if somebody's like on the borderline, for example. It only really matters if you're talking about the bottom 1% and the top 10, 20%. So if you've got someone who's kind of borderline, are they going to be in or out of the promote pool? And you're thinking maybe out because they only got a 4.2 on this dimension or from their peers, but you look at the distributions, you see they got 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 5, 5, 1. You might go, you know what, you take out that 1. Now they're at 4.4, they're right in there. So I think it's that kind of adjustment, on the critical cases, the borderline, that we might, try to walk them through when and how you might use the information in the distribution of the ratings, without having to kind of arbitrarily say the top and the bottom are bad data. Or outliers, whatever. So, I don't have anything else unless you do.
I was just gonna mention that in order for this to work, I really think it's a change. No matter how elegant your scales are and how well they're supported from a psychometric standpoint,
yeah,
there needs to be a lot of leadership support.
Yeah.
We have a lot of folks overseas are also on the same page with this initiative.
Yeah.
Rationale. Talk about closely aligned to the mission to inspire them.
Yeah.
Become believers in this process.
I know.
Before it actually settles down.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the things I'm trying to push is that, like when we did a webinar, like letting people know, this may seem like kind of, boring, redesign, promotion, or, performance management, but it's like we can have a best-in-class system. We can make this system work. We can really, really promote the best people and develop people so we have more best people, and just because I think we really will. A lot of good thinking and hard work has gone into this. It's been like a 3-year process.
For sure, just along the same lines, what you can do to kind of encourage the support is to ask the stakeholders, the board members, what dimensions that value the most, make them involved in that process.
Mm-hmm.
That way they'll be more involved in it.
Yeah.
When you're implementing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you talked about the problems with all these different sources. I was wondering if you looked at self-ratings at all, or do you think self-ratings would just be even worse?
I used to be more of a believer in the potential of self-ratings until I was going back to reading some of this literature. That it was very interesting, that Atkins and Wood study, the assessment centers, they did, where they had a really good criterion, I thought, in the overall assessment center score. They looked at self-ratings, and they weren't correlated with anything, and what they found was they had very clear overestimaters and underestimators, and the overestimators relative to all the other ratings were by far the poorest performers. And I think you just see that, over and over again. I did when I was doing leader development stuff. The best leaders were modest and humble, and some of the worst were like giving themselves 5s all over the place. And you could almost use it, in the opposite way, like, self-assessment. If you think you're all 5s, guess what? You need some coaching.
Yeah, I was just wondering because I've done some meta-analyses on self-auto-agreement, and I know there's been some recent meta-analyses on counterproductive work behavior that looked at mean levels, and something interesting that the authors found was that mean levels of self-rated CWB were actually higher than observer rating levels. Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, sounds like there's some problems with the culture of SSOs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll take a while to get people out of the mode of we just have to exaggerate about ourselves. We just have to. And every time we talk about what we're trying to do with the with the coaching and feedback, again, we've got this really good performance management side where we're going to be doing a lot of training and rolling out requirement for quarterly conversations and dialogue and inquiry-based coaching and all kinds of, good stuff to start kind of breaking away from the thought that, you can never admit that you might have a weakness or a flaw, and kind of get people to be a little bit more honest and candid. And, so it might be that if that takes after 4 or 5 years, you might get better self-assessments. Yeah.
I know when I'm making annual ratings, it's hard to think back a year about all the things that the person I'm rating has done, and well, it's impossible.
Yeah.
I wonder if it would be useful throughout the year, particularly for supervisors, to kind of keep a running journal or critical incidents about people as they happen, and then when it's time to do the ratings, they can go back and look at them as a reminder.
Yeah, probably very useful. Yeah. That's kind of what we're doing in our quarterly conversations. So we've developed a form which is going to be automated. Hooray! We actually did find some money end of year, and so we're going to have an automated system where what we're requiring, because all the FSOs said, if you don't make us do it, we won't do it. So we are actually mandating a quarterly conversation. And all that's required is that when we get the automated system, at least once a quarter, the employee or the supervisor has to agree. Well, no, there'll be a block where they can write notes about the conversation. The conversation could take place over, 2-3 days at lunch, or it could be a 1-hour meeting they schedule. It could be, at the end of the meeting where you sit around for an hour afterwards and talk about priorities and, performance and progress. So we're trying to help people understand that whenever you're talking about what you expect of people and how things are going and performance and priorities, and that you're having a conversation about performance. So get a little bit more conscious about it and then take notes about it. So we're not requiring, because we're trying to get away from this, burdensome, this AEF culture of, write these big, huge, labor-intensive things. This AUSA shuts down for the month of April because people are writing these narratives. Nobody does anything else, and it's ludicrous. So we really wanted to stay away from that, but we're encouraging people to use the automated system, like when you have to note-taking for exactly that. Like, we just talked about this, or here's the challenge, or here's what we're doing, critical incidents, whatever, that will help them. It'll help the employee at the end of the year when they do their annual accomplishment record. So accomplishments hopefully will get recorded. But also notes about performance that we're hoping people will write about and talk about, because they won't go to the promotion board. So that's what people can't wrap their heads around, like our performance management stuff isn't going to promotion. In fact, we had a conversation with one of the Foreign Service officers where they said, well, we could institute the new promotion package this year. You'd still have to do your old annual evaluation form, because we can't, based on our union agreement, we can't eliminate that yet, but that ends like March 31st, then they write their AAF narratives, they're due the end of April. The boards meet in June. I said we could still have the separate new promotion package. And it's like, well, then what would be the AEFs be for? It's like, that's your annual evaluation. That's like over here. Said, but they wouldn't go anywhere? They wouldn't be used for anything? It's like, well, no, like the rest of the world. Like, you just get one. It doesn't go to a promotion board. And it's just like such a weird concept that you would actually write up something about performance and not use it for promotion. That's just kind of like, yeah, it's okay to write down something about performance and not worry that, it's going to ruin your career. So we'll see if they use it. All right.
Probably wrap up, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.